are on the brink of a total economic collapse across this globe. The signs are all there, yet most people have their heads too deep in the sand to understand what is coming. Currencies will collapse, economies will crumble, but will Bitcoin be this world's savior, or will it also be brought to its knees? We'll find out in about 10 minutes, because it's time for Chico Crypto. Yeah, things are going to get unbelievably serious very soon. We are staring in the face of economic, currency, and nation-state collapses. This will be far worse than the 2008 economic crisis, and even could outdo the Great Depression of 1929. And the funny thing is, we can watch this economic hurricane approach in real time. Currencies are starting to collapse across the board. Everyone knows about the British pound, which went into a free fall earlier this week, almost reaching 1-to-1 parity with the dollar, its lowest level on record versus USD. But as we can see from the chart, this free fall has been going on for a while now. Checking out this chart, we can see the British pound was sitting at a cool $1.38 in November of last year. But with the recent collapse, it got to a low of $1.03, which has been a retracement of over 25% in under a year. But it's not only the UK's currency, the bond market is going bananas. Here is the 30-year UK bond price, called a gilt. Earlier this week, it was down over 55% since the beginning of the year, and down nearly 45% from just a couple months ago. With the UK currency collapsing and their bond market about to implode, the BOE, the Bank of England, had to step in. Financial Times covered the fiasco, and their article says the Bank of England took emergency action on Wednesday, unleashing £65 billion bond buying program aimed at stemming a spiraling crisis in government debt markets. The BOE suspended a program to sell gilts, part of an effort to get surging inflation under control, and instead pledged to buy long-dated bonds at a rate of up to $5 billion a day for the next 13 weekdays. And according to this article from the Daily Record, they said respected Sky News economics editor Ed Conway said he had been told pension funds were on the imminent brink of insolvency, which pushed the Bank of England to act. Millions of working people and businesses have money in pension funds, which will pay out a guaranteed sum on retirement, which could have all been lost. So this was a bailout. The UK government is resuming quantitative easing to bail out pension funds that had over-leveraged themselves and were facing margin calls of insolvency that could have happened at any time past Wednesday of this week. But it isn't only Britain. The world's top economies are also facing a currency and bond crisis. As we can see, the world's biggest economies are number 1, the United States, number 2, China, number 3, Japan, number 4, Germany, and number 5, the UK. These countries' economies make up 55% of the total global economy. And now, checking out the currencies of these economies, Chinese Yuan has been collapsing, Japan's yen has been collapsing, Germany's euro is collapsing, and of course the UK's is too. The only currency that isn't going into free fall is the world's reserve currency, the US dollar. A full-on currency collapse of 4 out of the 5 biggest economies in the world is not good. But many people will say, but the dollar is fine. We don't have anything to worry about as Americans. Well, boy, let me tell you, that is about as wrong as it gets. The US dollar will be next. Let me explain why. Just last week, it was the Japanese yen getting hit hard. And to save the yen from a full-on collapse, the Japanese government had to step in and intervene for the first time in 24 years. From popular Japanese news outlet Kyodo, we can see they say, the Bank of Japan, as ordered by the Finance Ministry, is believed to have sold dollar-denominated assets it holds, such as US Treasuries, to buy the yen in the financial market, investors said. Now, if we look at the largest holders of US Treasuries, aka US debt, we can see it's all the countries who are facing massive downturns in their currencies. Japan is number 1 with over 1.2 trillion. Second is China with nearly 1 trillion. Third is the UK with 634 billion. And then finally, it's the Eurozone countries like Luxembourg, Ireland, Belgium, France, Norway, and Germany, who combined have over 1.2 trillion in US Treasury securities. So if the bailout doesn't work for Britain, then England is going to have to begin the selling of US Treasuries. Same with China, same with Eurozone countries. They will do the same thing Japan has been doing, selling their US debt assets to buy up and defend their own currencies from a meltdown, which in turn is going to blow up the global bond market, not just within the UK. And this is already beginning if you know where to look. Liquidity in the US bond market is already facing serious challenges. Checking out the US government liquidity index for treasuries, we can see outside of the worst of the pandemic, liquidity is at the worst level in over 12 years. You don't want high numbers with this index, as high numbers represent stressed liquidity conditions. The bond market move index, which is a measure of implied volatility in the market, is reaching seriously high levels, which when it gets over this level, it usually means a serious global shakedown is coming. It got over this in 2020 with the pandemic. It jumped over this in 2008 with that financial crisis. It jumped over this with the Iraq War and with 9/11. Now, jumping over to the performance of the global bond market, we can see since the beginning of the year, it has lost over 20% of its value. And this is unheard of throughout modern history and was never thought to be possible before this year. This index is priced in dollars. With 53% of the index in foreign denominated bonds, the strong dollar is killing it. This is why the US aggregate of this is doing relatively better, as it's 100% dollar denominated bonds, but it's still getting crushed over the year, down nearly 15% instead of 20%. This isn't good, my friends. If you look at historical performance of US bonds since 1977, this negative 14.86 performance is the worst by extremely large amounts. The next worst performance from US bonds came back in 1994, when there was a negative 2.9% return. That means this year is over 4 times as bad. So what does this mean, Tyler? Well, governments across the globe will have 2 choices. Do what the UK just did and resume quantitative easing, pushing up their inflation to even higher highs. Or they will do what Japan did and have to dip into their US cash reserves or balance of treasuries and sell them to defend their own currency, hurting the US economy and the dollar. Now, the infamous Zero Hedge covered this in an article just posted yesterday, and this is what they concluded. They said, "Let us break it down for you. Pivot means that central banks can't take any more pain and will soon do QE and rate hikes at the same time everywhere, eventually ending hiking and starting to cut rates. The bottom line is that this is the beginning of the end for the fiat system, which now faces a terminal dilemma. Fight inflation and suffer market collapse and economic depression with millions laid off, or push to stabilize social order and employment with higher asset prices. Runaway hyperinflation be damned. Fiat currencies are coming to their end. The everything bubble is about to pop. The yen is going to crumble, the pound will get pounded, the euro will falter, and the yuan will collapse. And this will push up the dollar in the short term, but eventually the contagion will find its way into the USD and the US economy, because our bond market is already showing the cracks. But this may have been their plan all along: collapse global currencies to usher in a new CBDC system. But if this collapse does happen, people will lose faith in the government and won't want anything to do with their new CBDC. The only other option people will have is gold and gold 2.0, aka Bitcoin, which is much easier to use as money than big old bricks of gold. Just wait and see, a Bitcoin super cycle will come. after just a bit more pain, as governments and central banks continue to pull the wool over people's eyes. But soon those people will see so clearly now as hyperinflation takes over across the globe. Cheers, viewers. I'll see you next time.